Hey, good morning, Fana. Welcome to another virtual Sunday school class. Thanks for sticking with us through this. I don't know how sick you are seeing me and listening to me, but I am sick of seeing myself and listening to myself on these things. I'm anxious to get back to just a classroom setting. But nevertheless, this is where we are, and we are thankful that we have this ability to get teaching out to people. And as we move forward, we started a new series last week. We have Sunday school books at the church. You can download it from the internet. We can email you one. Hopefully your teachers and shepherds got that information out to you. If you need one, be sure and get in, like I said, in touch with the office. Go to the website, or you can come by the office and pick one up. So we're moving through the books of Samuel and Kings and the history books. Finished up Judges and talked a little bit about that. Talked a little bit about Saul last week. I'm not going to spend much time on Saul. We're going to be on David for the next 3 weeks. Jennifer did a great kind of wrap-up of Saul on Wednesday night's lesson, this past Wednesday night, which would have been the 13th, 14th, I think the 15th of April. So if you want more information on that, go back and check that out. It was a really good job on that. So David, I've been studying him. We're going to be on him for 3 weeks. You know, I found one interesting quote. It said he was the first human being in world literature. And I thought, well, that's interesting. Never really thought about it like that. But, you know, these books, Samuel and 1st, 2nd Samuel, that tell the story of David primarily, were written, you know, really before literature had come into its own. You had poems and things like that, but they would present the characters really, you know, in kind of overarching hero type things. And with David, we get this, I mean, we really get a good picture of David, his flaws, his good points, everything. He is that first person, more so than Moses, more so than Abraham, or any of the characters that we've run into before. We really see it with David. So, you know, and another interesting thing about David, he's really one of 3 characters in the Bible that we see not only the surface that we get a narrative story about, but we're able to see what's going on inside their mind and their hearts. The other 2 are Jesus and Paul. Jesus, you know, you have the Gospels that tell the narrative of Jesus' life and how that kind of flows. But then you have his teachings, his parables, his prayers, and even his conversations. You really see, you know, what was going on inside of Jesus' mind and his heart through those things. Paul, similar thing. The book of Acts kind of gives us the narrative story of Paul's life, at least from salvation on. We get some other glimpses in some of his letters. But in his letters, you get to see what was going on in Paul's mind and his heart and his relationship with God that kind of goes along with this narrative thing. David, a little bit different. You get the narrative of the story, but what do we get? We get his Psalms. And that's where we get to see, you know, what's going on in David's mind and what's going on in his heart. So it's kind of interesting to see this work out. And we're going to be on that because David's narrative is very interesting. And like I said, it's really neat because you can go back and you can find Psalms that are directly connected to certain events that happen in his life. And you may look at the narrative and get one impression, but then you read the Psalms and you kind of see what was driving his actions and the reasons for those. So let's get started. So this idea of the war narrative that I brought up last week, once again, it's continuing. Remember, the idea is that way back in Genesis, this idea of a war started between God trying to redeem mankind against the forces of evil. Now, like I said last week, this war, it's over. It's done. It's been decided. We see that in the book of Revelation. However, it still has to be fought out. And because of the way wars are fought, you know, there are things that people do during wars. We don't reveal our tactics. We don't reveal our strategies. So when you look at certain things that God does, and we'll look at a couple of them this week, you might say, well, that doesn't really seem like God. But once again, when viewed in the eye, or viewed in this way of looking at it as a war, they're tactics, strategies that, you know, counterintelligence almost. So keep that in mind as we move on. So let's get started. So Saul messed up. He is no longer the king. It's kind of where things pick up. And you see God telling Samuel, hey, I want you to go down and you're going to anoint the new king. Now Samuel's nervous. He's afraid of Saul because he's already told Saul, hey, you're not the king anymore. I'm sure Saul was not happy about that. So in 1 Samuel 16, 2-5, you know, God has told Samuel, go down here, find Jesse's sons, and you are going to anoint the new king. So Samuel says, well, how can I go? This is 1 Samuel 16, 2 through 5. How can I go? If Saul hears it, he will kill me. And the Lord said, take a heifer with you and say, I have come to sacrifice to the Lord. And invite Jesse to the sacrifice, and I will show you what to do. Samuel did what the Lord commanded and came to Bethlehem. The elders of the city came to meet him trembling and said, do you come peaceably? Because you got to remember, Samuel had judged the people, beforehand. So they're a little worried that he shows up. And Samuel tells them, peaceably, I have come to sacrifice to the Lord. Consecrate yourselves and come with me to the sacrifice. And he consecrated Jesse and his sons and invited them to the sacrifice. So it almost looks deceptive here. But God's at work already. He's done with Saul. We're moving on to David. And so he tells Samuel, hey, take a cow with you. Go down there and sacrifice it while you're anointing him. So not really dishonesty. Once again, just a tactic to get Samuel down there and anoint the son of David. So David is anointed. You go through the whole scene of Jesse can't remember that he's got a seventh or eighth child out there. Oh yeah, he's the one out shepherding. And Samuel anoints him. And it says that the Spirit of the Lord rushes on him. 1 Samuel 16:13. Then Samuel took the horn of oil and anointed him in the midst of his brothers. And the Spirit of the Lord rushed upon David from that day forward. Now, that's right at the end of of a section there. And then right over in 1 Samuel 16:14, the next verse, it says, now the Spirit of the Lord departed from Saul, and a harmful spirit from the Lord tormented on him. So you get this idea that it moves quick. The Spirit of the Lord comes upon David. Now, we don't know what happened. I don't know if he went back to shepherding or whatever, but events begin to move quickly, and we begin to see David as who begins really right off to move into this king type position. So the Spirit of the Lord leaves Saul, and a evil spirit comes upon Saul. Now this troubles people. What is this? Why would God do this? Well, once again, we're at war. God's job now that he's working on, how do I get David from shepherding that even his dad doesn't remember him? How do I get him into the spotlight? Because if he's going to be the king, he's going to have to be. And this is the beginning of kind of seeing this David's character. And so here's how it happens. You go down a little bit further, right after this in 1 Samuel 16:17 through 22. It says, so Saul said to his servants, provide for me a man who can play well and bring him to me. Right? Because that apparently he knew that, or somehow that would ease whatever pain or symptoms he was having from this evil spirit. And then we see God at work here. It says, one of the young men answered, behold, I have seen a son of Jesse the Bethlehemite, who is skillful in playing, a man of valor, a man of war, prudent in speech, and a man of good presence. And the Lord is with him. So this first image that we get of David outside of his family is very interesting, right? Now remember, his dad was like, yeah, I've got another son. That's right, the kid that's always out with the sheep, bring him in. But then all of a sudden we see this scene in Saul's court where this young court attendee knows who David is. And he doesn't just know who David is, he clearly knows about him. Now I don't know if David's like playing at open mic nights at the local Starbucks, but they knew who he was. Maybe he was already singing songs, hanging out with people his own age. I don't know, but David is suddenly, boom, onto the stage. And not just, hey, I know a guy who plays a harp and sings. It's no, he's a man of valor. He's skillful in playing. He's a man of war, prudent in speech. So you get all this buildup of David right off the bat. And then it's very interesting. It says, therefore Saul sent messengers to Jesse and said, send me David your son, who is with the sheep. And Jesse took a donkey laden with bread and a skin of wine and a young goat and sent them by David his son to Saul. And David came to Saul and entered his service, and Saul loved him greatly, and he became his armor bearer. Now we're going to talk about this a little bit more next week, but it's very interesting. Saul's daughter, and Saul's son are kind of the first three characters that we get to see that have encounters with David, and they all three love him. So you see God's blessing on him already as how he's just goes from out in the field, right? Boom, He's like in Saul's court now as a musician. He's his armor bearer. And you begin to see this. Now, the next scene right after this is the David and Goliath scene. And as we move into that, we're going to see David presented in a different fashion, but always go back to those comments that the guy made about him as to who's going to be. Now, the scene of David and Goliath is very interesting because we get to see in this scene David, right? He's going to be kind of play acting, but you're going to see underneath this current of everything David begins to do as soon as he steps on the scene is very intentional, very much to make himself look good, not Saul look bad, but make him look like this man of valor. We're going to see that he's prudent in speech, that he's faithful. He's going to do all the right things. Now, some people say David was very almost Machiavellian, that he plotted and planned all this stuff. And is that bad? I mean, God had said to him, you are the next king. You are the king already. He has been anointed. You need to begin acting like that. And when David comes onto the scene, a lot of times we get caught up in this little idea of little bitty David fighting big old Goliath and all this. But when you really break it down, you see that David he was ready when he showed up. And we're going to look at that a little bit more. So they always say in world literature that the first words spoken by a character are very revealing about that character. So we get the first word spoken by David in 1 Samuel 17:25. And David said, now David has come, so he's already in Saul's service. Apparently he's gone back home. We don't really know the timeline here because the author isn't really interested in presenting a timeline. He's presenting us pictures of David growing as a king, even while Saul is still technically the king. So 1 Samuel 17:25. David has come to bring food to the armies. At least that's why his dad sent him and why his brothers think he's come. But that's not David's intention at all. He has come to become even more well known. Maybe he's known as a musician, as someone in Saul's armor bearer. Now he's fixing to become known as a warrior. He's taking that next step. So, first word spoken by David. And David said to the man who stood by him, what shall be done for the man who kills this Philistine and takes away the reproach of Israel? First question. For who is this uncircumcised Philistine that he should defy the armies of the living God? So this is very revealing about David's character and kind of how he's going to approach the next few years, really all of his life. First is, what's in it for the person who does this? What's my reward? David knows he's the king. He knows he needs to be moving in a certain direction. So what's my reward? What's going to happen? Because I know I can go kill this guy because God has given me the ability. And then the second question shows his faith in God. Who is this guy? Why are we even worried about him? Where is your faith in God? So self-promotion to a certain extent, not in a negative sense, but self-promotion and devotion to God. So it's kind of funny. His brother Eliab, who I think is the eldest, he's like, David, why are you even here? Why are you talking? We know you just came here. You're tricking people so you can see the war. Well, Eliab's kind of right. David is kind of making some moves in a certain direction, but he hadn't just come there to see the war. So what does David do? He just keeps asking this same question again and again, these same two questions. What's in it for whoever kills this Philistine? And why are we even afraid of it? And eventually, the attention gets to Saul, right? Saul brings David to him. And, he begins to, give him the opportunity. Like, if you think you can kill this guy, let's go. Of course, David puts on the armor and says, no, I can't do this. And you kind of move in that direction. So Saul is talking to David, and listen to how David says in 1 Samuel 17:32 that shows that David's confidence is already there. Now, before we go into this, I want you to think back about Gideon, think back about Moses and these guys and how they were very hesitant to follow. There's no hesitancy with David. 1 Samuel 17:32, when David finally gets to talk to Saul, he says, David says to Saul, let no man's heart fail because of him. Your servant will go and fight with this Philistine. It's just crazy. There's no lack of confidence. He has extreme faith in God and extreme faith in himself because he knows I'm to be the king. This is that next step. So then you see David tricking Goliath. As you come out, as David comes out, he doesn't wear armor, right? And he comes out with a staff. Now he has a sling, but it's almost like it's hidden, right? Because it's not like Goliath is expecting it. As a matter of fact, what Goliath says is, am I a dog that you should come to me with sticks? So most people think, well, it's his staff, and he thinks David is coming to fight him with the staff. So as it moves on, of course, we all know the end of it, right? He doesn't see the sling. David comes along, boom, knocks Goliath out. He falls down. And then notice that what David does. So the sling probably knocked Goliath unconscious or could have killed him. We don't exactly know. Slings were very powerful. You look over in the book of Judges, it tells about a group of men. It says among all these, the Benjamites, there were 700 chosen men who were left-handed. Everyone could sling a stone at a hair and not miss. So slingers were very common in armies back then. Early type of artillery, I guess you could say. Goliath is looking at the staff, thinking that, and then boom, he's down. And then David takes his Goliath's sword and actually cuts his head off with it. So you see this other aspect of David, very ruthless, right? He has a job to do. He's going to do that job. So we're seeing David kind of slowly unveiled through these events. We see him as talked about over in Saul's court, the musician, the man of speech. Then with Goliath, we get to see some of his speech, the way he phrases it. Who is this uncircumcised Philistine? That it puts fear in the heart of the armies of God. You see David's speech that you will see again and again, and you see his actions. And, there's a book by a guy named Malcolm Gladwell called David and Goliath, and it's really more about, how a lot of times the little guy beats the bad guy or beats the big guy, and a lot more to it. But at the very beginning, he's got some interesting things that he talks about this battle between David and Goliath. It might be worth you read. I'm not going to get into it, but, it's kind of interesting. There's some medical things that he thinks were wrong with Goliath that allowed David to kind of trick him so easily. But nevertheless, the point he made, we've had these two scenes of David, right? We've had him in the court. We know that he comes and he quickly gains favor with Saul and with the people in court. Now this battle scene, we see him gain favor with people. He comes in and he's a very confident young man. So it's almost like like I said earlier, it's almost like you could look at him like Machiavellian. If you don't know that term, Google is a guy that wrote a book called The Prince. That's kind of the field book for how you come into power. And there is that aspect of David. As we follow him, every move he makes is carefully calculated to make him look better. Think about after this scene, what happens? Well, Saul is happy initially, but then he starts hearing women sing these songs. As David begins to lead people in battle against the Philistines, there's the song, Saul kills Philistines in the hundreds, David kills them in the thousands. So it's going to make him angry, and as that builds up. But I want to take a step back from the narrative, and I want to take a look at the Psalms and kind of what is building this framework in David's mind. Now, of course, we always have to remember the Spirit of God is upon him, so that's part of it. But to get this framework that David has built up all of his life as a shepherd and how he used his time so wisely. And David did not waste his time. When he was a shepherd, he learned these things. So let's look at what David told Saul. Remember when Saul, he's going to go out and fight Goliath? Saul's like, you can't beat this guy. Look at what David says in 1 Samuel 17:33 through 37. And Saul said to David, you're not able to go against this Philistine to fight with him, for you are but a youth, and he has been a man of war from his youth. But David said to Saul, your servant used to keep sheep for his father. So you would think, okay. And when there came a lion or a bear and took a lamb from the flock, I went after him and struck him and delivered it out of his mouth. And if he arose against me, I caught him hard by the beard and struck him and killed him. So David's not just, your average shepherd, or maybe he was an average shepherd, I don't know. But he took his job seriously, and when he went against God's creatures, he was not afraid because he knew about the world order. He watched it. He learned it. We're going to get to Psalm in a minute and do that. But David used these opportunities. They built something in him. And notice what he says. He says, your servant struck down both lions and bears. Right after the whole thing, I'll grab him by his beard and I kill him. And he says, your servant struck down both lions and bears, and this uncircumcised Philistine shall be like one of them. For he has defied the armies of the living God. And David said, the Lord who has delivered me from the paw of the lion and from the paw of the bear will deliver me from the hand of this Philistine. And Saul said to David, go, and may the Lord be with you. So you see this guy, this David, that is just, fearless. Well, it's because he spent a life out there. And Psalm 8, verses 3 through 8, I think give us a good picture of David's worldview that he developed when he was young, right? Because he wasn't wasting his time. He was shepherding, but it wasn't just something to do. He was building this worldview of God. He was looking at events that happened in his life. And later on, when other events happened, he was able to look back on those and put them in a framework. So Psalm 8, 3 through 8. Now, we don't know for sure that David wrote this while he was a shepherd, but you can see this view of the world develop. David says, when I look at the heavens, the work of your fingers, and the moon and the stars, which you have set in place, what is man that you are mindful of him? And the son of man that you care for him? Yet you have made him a little lower than the heavenly beings and crowned him with glory and honor. You have given him dominion over the works of your hand. You have put all things under his feet, all sheep and oxen, and also the beasts of the field, the birds of the heavens, the fish of the sea, whatever passes along the paths of the sea. So in this little excerpt from Psalm 8, we see that David understands man's dominion and understands, more importantly, that if he is a servant of God, God will place these things under him. So when he comes to this situation, he looks at that Philistine, at Goliath, and he's like, look, God has told us to kill these guys. We need to run them out. This guy is no different than the bears and the lions that used to attack my sheep. I mean, he took on a bear. Goliath probably didn't look that scary. He's killed bears, he's killed lions, and he's built this framework. So why is David so fearless? Well, because he has this idea of God, and he understands from the beginning his role. As soon as he anointed God, he knows, okay, God has anointed me to be the king. I will be the king. I may have to go through a number of steps to get there, but every action I take needs to be with that in mind. So as you see that, you understand David had built this worldview. He didn't waste his time. And I think that's a good lesson for us in the midst of all this. Are we wasting our time? Are we spending too much time on Netflix? Or like Jennifer talked about in her devotion the other day, maybe some people are turning to alcohol or other things, we could be wasting time in this period. And I know there's so many emotions, so much anxiety and anger and just everything going on, but we need to not waste this time. Redeem the time, as Paul says. Look at what David did. He looked around. He built it into his worldview. He didn't just blind himself to it. So next thing that we see about David when we look at things, we learn that David was serious and diligent in whatever task God gave him. Shepherding or king, both of them David looked at, whether he was a shepherd, whether he was becoming a king or was a king, they need to be approached with the same focus. And with that, I want to look at Psalm 19, 9 through 11. Now, Psalm 19 is a big psalm, right? Not 119, but 19. You look at it, there's so many big theological issues that are there, but I think you can pull apart a few verses and kind of get to this point that shows how serious and diligent David was. So Psalm 19, 9 through 11. The fear of the Lord is clean, enduring forever. The rules of the Lord are true and righteous altogether. More to be desired are they than gold, even much fine gold. Sweeter also than honey and drippings of the honeycomb. Moreover, by them is your servant warned. In keeping them, there is great reward. So that kind of gives you this view of David as he looks at everything that he does. is tied to God's law, tied to God's will, and that is what he's supposed to do. He's supposed to put his utmost into it, by keeping the words and the law of God, your desire to please God. And so that just, all of David's life was under this. Did he mess up later on? Yes, he did. He sinned, and we'll get into that. But you see this view, whether I'm shepherding, whether I'm trying to be king, whether I am king, I understand that all of this is set up by God. And do we understand that? Do we look at that in our own lives? Or do we, compartmentalize things? Well, here I'm going to be at church. Here I'm going to do this. Here's work. Here's family. And, we forget sometimes that it's all given to us by God. So even the little jobs that we may not think are so important are extremely important because it builds this worldview that we have like David had. So also, David developed a pattern and practice in his life dependent upon God, and this gave him confidence in when situations like fighting Goliath or fighting bears would arrive. So you look at that, like I said, you look at Gideon or Moses, how nervous they were initially. I can't do this, Lord. I've got a speech impediment. I can't do this, Lord. And they ask for all these signs. Does David ask for any of that stuff? The Bible doesn't tell us. He just stepped in and started doing it. He played the music in Saul's, he pleased Saul. He comes here to kill Goliath, he kills Goliath. Later on, when Saul puts him in charge of killing Philistines, he kills Philistines. I mean, he just goes in and he does that. And I think Psalm 23 is so reflective of this. I mean, you think about that psalm. We all know it. All the things that God does. I mean, he makes me lie down. He gives me water. He restores my soul. He looks after me when I walk through the valley of the shadow of death. He sets a table before my enemies. All of these things David talks about are reflective of a pattern and a practice that he's built from early on of depending on God. God's going to take care of everything in his life from sleeping to safety and war, right? He's going to restore his soul when he comes through bad times. So David has developed this idea of looking at life through this lens of God. And how do you do that? Well, you look at God's word. I mean, you meditate on it. You think about it. You look at nature. You think, wow. You don't just look at it and see some scientific thing. You look at it and you see the wonder of God working. It's springtime. Things are beautiful. Yeah, we're sneezing. Yeah, we got allergies. But things are gorgeous out there, Are you doing this? Are you building this practice and pattern of depending on God in all aspects of your life? And then finally, and David understood that in God's eyes, there seemed to be little difference in the nature or importance of a task one is given. Instead, the importance seems to be in how one carries out that task. So once again, you look at David's life, shepherding, beginning, playing music for Saul, fighting Goliath, becoming king, being a king. The only time David messes up is when he forgets to focus on the importance of the task at hand. The whole scene with Bathsheba, which we'll get into more. He said, what does it say? It was springtime, the time when kings go to war. David doesn't go to war. He lost that focus. That idea that no matter what I'm doing, I need to do it to the best because this task has come from God to me. And you see that in Psalm 15, right? Great psalm that I think really shows this. Let me read it to you. Psalm 15. O Lord, who shall sojourn in your tent? Who shall dwell on your holy hill? He who walks blamelessly and does what is right and speaks truth in his heart, who does not slander with his tongue and does no evil to his neighbor, nor takes up a reproach against his friend, in whose eyes a vile person is despised, but who honors those who fear the Lord, who swears to his own hurt and does not change, who does not put out his money at interest, and he does not take a bribe against the innocent. He who does these things shall never be moved. So you look at this psalm, and it really encompasses all of life, right? And it's this idea that all of these things are important. You do this, you do this, you do this, you don't do this, you don't do this, you don't do this. And these are the people that can climb the hill of God. These are the people that can approach God in the right manner. So we're going to look at more of this as we go along. You've got a lesson, you can go look. I didn't touch on a lot in the lesson because I feel like this is more important. This has helped me grow a ton over the years of just, going and looking at these Psalms and seeing, because you get this unique glimpse of David and how this worldview built. So you look at, how could he do that? Well, he could do that because this is how he saw the world. So I hope this has been helpful to you. Hope you have a great weekend. Look forward to seeing you on Sunday at church at 11 o'clock in your car again. Hopefully pretty soon we'll be able to do a little bit more than that. Hey, we love you. We're praying for you. If you need anything, let us know. Thanks a lot.